Well, good evening, friends. Friends here in the loft and friends out there in the Zoom room and people watching on the recording. Welcome to the first Spiritual Science Loft Talk in quite some time. It's great to be back doing this. It's been, I guess, a couple of years since I've done a Spiritual Science Loft Talk. I've been doing classes and things like that here, of course. But to get back to these talks, I delve into some spiritual science, and tonight the theme is debunking scientific myths. Yeah, coming out of the corner fighting with debunking scientific myths, asking the questions. I know in the post I put out it was more like statements, but I want to ask these as questions. Is the heart a pump? Do we think with our brains? Did the universe begin with a big bang? And do humans come from animals? So I'm quite passionate about these questions, and something that I have been contemplating for a few years. And really, in my background, I've been a student of spiritual science for several decades. That's right, spiritual and science put together into one phrase. And that really is, some of the objective here is to bring about a reunification of something that has become quite separate and distinct, and perhaps even different camps set up in our society, whether you're in the scientific camp or you're in the spiritual camp. There's the split between religion and science back around the time of Darwin, and we have a separation of church and state, and that's all fine and well, but it could also be something of a problem in our society and also in our personal lives, where we have to compartmentalize these different aspects of our nature. And one could even boil it down to compartmentalizing the two sides of the brain, because for sure the one side of the brain, the left side of the brain, is known to be more the analytical and logical side of the brain that really favors facts and sense-oriented evidence and things that are substantiated in material existence. Whereas the right side of the brain is known to be more imaginative, more of the creative side, more the side that works in terms of pictures, and I like to refer to it more and more as the shamanistic side of our being, that isn't so focused on the things of this realm, but things beyond. And that's why it's more the imaginative side of our being, because through the pictures and symbols, which act as portals to access ideas and principles and powers, and perhaps even a realm that is behind the physical realm and informs what goes on in the physical realm through the powers and principles and so forth. So I've been interested in this because I think even just the name of the work I do here, it's called Spiritual Science as Social Activism. It's a form of social activism because I'm interested in being active in society, to reform society, to help society grow in a healthy way. And it feels that over the past couple of hundred years, with the Renaissance and the birth of the age of reason and rationale, and of course our modern scientific period, that we've really come more to the one side and left behind our spiritual or shamanistic connection to things, which I'm sure a lot of you out there yearn for that kind of shamanistic connection. I know if you're like me, you might have experimented with psychoactive substances, maybe gone and done ayahuasca down in the jungle of the Amazon, as I did a few years ago, just to see what else can open up in us beyond the normal discursive, rational thinking of things. Because one of the things I've been saying for the past few years is that one of the leading causes of mental illness is the scientific paradigm and the medical model that's based on the modern scientific paradigm, because it's put us out of balance. And any kind of illness, be it physical or mental illness, is really caused by imbalance. And so my feeling, and the reason why I'm using spiritual science as a form of social activism, is because I want to see a restoration of balance so that our society is healthy and the individuals in the society are healthy. Because it feels like in recent times the human being has fallen. The fallen human being, and I'm not referring to the fallen human being in the Judeo-Christian Islamic sense, where we have fallen from paradise, we've fallen from the Garden of Eden, but more to the point that the image and the idea of the human has fallen from what it was in past times, in past civilizations, the way our ancestors viewed themselves and identified themselves as being something special, that we were and are emanations of a divine plane of things that have come into material existence, and when we die, we return back to some world beyond, some spiritual world, that there is life after death, and that the reason we're here is to grow and evolve, having a temporary life, but preparation for an eternal life. And that gives life meaning when we feel that there's something more than just this, and at the end of our life, that's the end of it, and we go into a hole in the ground. So this thing about the human having fallen, and really it is due to the carnage of our scientific age that has come on so quickly and brought with it this methodology of everything being evidence-based. And if you don't have evidence of something, then it can't be. It can't exist. There has to be physical evidence. You have to be able to prove it. You have to be able to take it into a lab, double-blind tests, and all sorts of things like that, which is fine and well. Like, I really do feel, science has a positive side to it, that it's like we've grown another appendage. We've grown and developed the left side of our brain, which gives us this capacity for objective thinking, where we can look objectively at things. We can step outside of it and go, okay, I'm this and you're that, and we come to understand it through this objectivity. But at the same time, we've really lost touch with the connection to things because of this objective way of looking at things and the scientific methodology. Whereas in the past, our ancestors in previous civilizations that had more of an inclination towards right brain comprehension of things, and as they call it, the shamanistic way of viewing, they weren't so separated, they weren't so objective, they were actually in things, and they felt things in them through this shamanistic connection. And this can be still experienced now through different means. Doesn't necessarily involve psychoactive substances, but there's ways to bring about a balance in our cognition so we can regain a connection to things and have an experience of knowing them that's not just objective but subjective, that we as a subject can connect to things and they can tell us what they are rather than we telling them what they are. So really what I'm driving at here is to regain a balanced perspective of things, a balanced perception of things. And the only way we can really have a balanced perception is by having a balance of concepts. And right now we've swept away a lot of the concepts from the past that regarded ourselves as being spiritual beings that have a connection to a spiritual world, that in a sense we have an invisible nature that's connected to an invisible world, and we come into this visible world and we have senses that allow us to move and navigate in the visible world, but what about developing inner senses to be able to perceive the unmanifest or the invisible things and to stay connected to them? Because if they were the things that inform the visible world, then we really need to maintain that connection if we're going to evolve and grow forward in a healthy and balanced way. So let's dig into the different subject matter here tonight with some of these things we're asking questions around. And the first question is the heart simply a pump, a mechanical pump in your chest? Do you believe that 100%, as we're taught, as it's portrayed on so many YouTube videos, taught in classes, taught in universities, spoken by intelligent, educated doctors, that the heart is just a mechanical pump in your chest? Do you believe that? Well, it's not as simple as that, and science really knows that. If you go deeper into the subject, you'll see that there's still a lot of questions and a lot of anomalies, and there's continuing to be more research around this. If this pressure pump propulsion of the blood model is actually standing up to the test. And it doesn't stand up to the test, and science knows that to claim that this 1 pound muscle in your chest, which is about the size of your hand, clenched fist, is not physically capable to pump blood the way we claim that it does. Beat after beat, day after day, year after year, for a whole lifetime. Somebody calculated if the heart were to do that, if it had the power and the strength to do that, the heart would have to be much bigger. But it's just a 1 pound muscle in your chest that reputedly pumps this blood through all the arteries, veins, and capillaries, which, by the way, if you took all the the venous and arterial tubes and you laid them end to end, the ones in your body, it would wrap around the world, the entire world, 3 times. That's a fact. I read it in Wikipedia. 3 times around the world. So that little pump is supposed to pump this viscosic liquid. There's a real viscous stickiness to blood. That means it sticks to the arterial walls, so it just doesn't sail through smoothly like water. That's takes a lot of work to do that. So it doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't line up factually for the heart to be able to do that. So where does that leave us? What comes next in our investigation of this idea? What is it then that moves the blood? Well, as many of you know, I'm a fan of the work of Rudolf Steiner, and this is really where this idea comes from, because over 100 years ago he said that the heart is not a pump, and he said this is a very important thing that we get straight in our minds if we're going to evolve correctly, both as individuals and collectively, that we can't just regard this thing in the center of our chest as a mechanical pump. He put that as like top of the list things that we need to get the right concept on. So if the heart's not a pump, what moves the blood? He also made the enigmatic statement that it's not the heart that drives the blood, but rather it's the other way around. The blood drives the heart. Whoa, okay, maybe that's rattling your paradigm a little bit, that the blood drives the heart. Well, in fact, the blood is already moving in the embryo before the heart develops. The heart doesn't develop until later in the first trimester, but there's already blood circulating within the embryo. So, and in fact, the blood is circulating and is part of what helps the development of the heart. The heart at that point is like a tube, and you know, when it's a beginning stage, it's like a worm, this tube thing that has no valves, but the blood is circulating. Then, of course, the heart evolves and becomes what we have in our mature human body. So we can look at another example of where a fluid moves without a heart, without a pump to do it. If you consider a tree, for example, that the sap or the lifeblood in a tree moves up and down without the force of a pump. What is it that's causing that? Well, if you think about it, there is the external forces. Of course, the light and the warmth of the sun draws the sap up the tree, and then when it disappears, it goes back down the tree. So in that case, it's something peripheral. Something peripheral is moving the lifeblood in the tree. So we can transpose that idea over to the human, that something peripheral is at work to move the blood within the human body. And in fact, that's true. That the blood, well, Rudolf Steiner says that the blood is actually not pumped by the heart, but the heart stops. It's an impedance organ that stops the flow of blood that's returning through the venous system. And what is it that sends this blood to the heart? It's something from the periphery. In fact, every cell and all the tissue in the body vibrates and acts as little pumps that sends the blood back to the heart. The blood leaves the heart at a certain speed and comes to almost a complete stop when it gets to the capillaries at the level of the tissue and the cells. Comes to almost a complete stop where it has to offload the oxygen into the cells and pick up the waste products, the carbon dioxide and other waste products. So the train kind of stops for a moment so passengers can get on and off. And then it returns back to the heart, and when it gets back to the heart, it's going at the same speed that it left the heart, even though it comes to an almost complete stop when it gets to the periphery. So what's happening, for one thing, it's rather complex, and I'm just going to go through some of the aspects fairly quickly here, and then you can do your own research. But it's at the periphery, just the same as with the tree. There's something peripheral. The planets, you could say, sun and moon, working on the tree, moving the sap in the tree. Likewise, in the human body, it's at the periphery that things are active to send the blood back. And then the heart stops the blood. It impedes it. And so when someone pressed Rudolf Steiner to explain more of, you know, what was the mechanism that was the heart was doing, if it wasn't pumping, then what was it actually doing? He said that it was more like a hydraulic ram. And a hydraulic ram is a mechanism where they're sometimes used to block the flow of a river or a stream or something that's coming along, and you have a mechanism with a wall that blocks the flow until the pressure builds up enough on the one side of the wall that it triggers a mechanism so that a door opens, the ram opens, and it allows the pressure that's been built up to move the river beyond. And this is done so it can actually move rivers uphill. You would use a hydraulic ram if you wanted to direct water up a hill. So you block it, you impede it, you allow it to build up, pressure builds up, it triggers, and then it flows, and it's got some volition because of the hydraulic pressure that's built up, and it enters the vacuum of what's on the other side of the ram, and away she goes. So the heart is not pumping blood, but it's actually an impedance mechanism that allows it to build up pressure and then flow. So we're talking about a few things here. We're talking about the pumping that's happening at the periphery in the cells. We're talking about the hydraulic realm, and then there's another feature that the heart does, because the heart it's multifaceted and it's multidimensional, as we'll see. There's multi-dimensions to the heart, but it's multifaceted because we know it's not just the muscle. Back in the 90s, they discovered that it's also an endocrine gland. It's part of the endocrine system, along with the thymus and the thyroid and the hypothalamus and pineal, things like that. The heart is also secreting hormones as an endocrine gland, and it's also a brain. It has neuron cells as part of it. And in fact, it's the heart is sending through neuron cells more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. So at the center of our being, which in Chinese medicine they call the heart the emperor, because it really is kind of the commander of all the systems, it's multifaceted and multidimensional, and really the center of centers. So another feature that it's what's happening with the blood is that there's what's known as the fourth state of water, or the fourth phase of water. And you can look up this work, this research done by a man named Gerald Pollack, called the fourth phase of water. We know the three phases. You can have it steam, you can have liquid, or you can have solid water that's frozen. So those are three states. But Dr. Gerald Pollack identified a fourth state, a gel state, where water becomes something between solid and fluid in a gel state under certain conditions. And this gel state happens when it meets a surface that likes water to be stuck to it. And that's the way it is on the interior walls of the arteries and the veins. It will stick there, and because the fluid of the blood has a negative charge, and then the gel phase of the water also has a negative charge, things of the same charge repel each other. So when the blood leaves the heart through the aortic arch, because of these opposing charges, negative charges, this also guides the propulsion of the blood through the venous system. So it's not the pressure pump propulsion of the heart that's doing it. It's using basically electromagnetism to move it through. And there's a lot more electromagnetism at work than we really believe at this point. We attribute a lot of things to gravity and this and that, but there's a lot more that electromagnetism is doing than we give credit to. Another anomaly around the propulsion of the blood is the aortic arch. And the aortic arch is the big curve, the artery where the blood goes through when it leaves the heart. Now, if the heart was pumping, as you know, we keep telling ourselves, you would think it would act like the aortic arch would act like a garden hose. If you turn on a garden hose that's got a kink in it or a bend in it, what happens? It would straighten out. The kink, the bend would straighten out because of the pressure and propulsion of the water shooting through it. But that's not what happens in the heart. Whenever there is the diastole is the expansion of the heart, in contrast to the systole, which is the contraction, expansion, diastole, systole. When you have the diastole, or the dilation of the heart, and the blood goes out, the aortic arch actually pulls in. It actually pulls in a little bit to resist this movement of the blood. So again, the heart is an impedance organ, and we haven't really discussed why that is. And we'll come back to it, but right now I want to move on to the next subject of our evening's discussion, and that is around the origin of the universe. Did the universe start with a big bang? What do you all think? Again, this has settled in as really the mainstream narrative, and there's lots of scientists that are on board with this, that at some point in time, although you can't really refer to time because you're saying time and space started when the universe started. So before time and space started, there was something where there was a point that was many times smaller than the point of a pin. Many times smaller than the point of a pin, that apparently had so much pressure and heat that all of a sudden it exploded, the Big Bang. And everything of the universe, all the galaxies, all the planets, dark matter, dark energy, solar systems, and you and me all emerged out of that tiny pinpoint. And that since then it's been a state of expansion, that the universe is expanding like a balloon, and someday it's going to run out of gas, it'll lose its propulsion, and because it considers space to be just a vacuum, an empty vacuum, it will then turn around, it'll start to contract, and end in what's called the Big Crunch. And that will be the end. And it all sounds, I suppose, plausible, but it really sounds rather meaningless and mechanical, and certainly completely devoid of any kind of spiritual idea or impulse or involvement. It's completely materialistic and mechanical. So that's the first problem I have with it, is that it doesn't acknowledge any of the spiritual dimension or aspects that our ancestors and the ancient people held as true. We've swept that all away, and in our reductionist science have just reduced it down to things that we can perceive and quantify. And so that's what astrophysicists do. They try to quantify what's going on in what they can observe through telescopes such as the Hubble telescope, which has been going for a few decades, and now this incredible advancement through scientific ingenuity with the James Webb Space Telescope, just launched this summer and producing incredible imagery. But it's also producing new data, which is starting to upset the apple cart in terms of the scientific dogma that has been propounded, because we've been told that based on the numbers and the number crunching, that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. But now they're finding there's galaxies that are even older than that. So that number's gone. How much faith can we put in the number crunching of astrophysicists who really have no connection or interest in including something of a spiritual dimension to life? Which, it just as an aside, this whole idea of the birth of the universe and expansion and then eventual implosion is almost a bit of a co-opting of the Hindu idea that everything began with the cosmic sound of Om. That Om is the mother sound, the creative sound that has given birth to the cosmos, and that the cosmos is alive and vibrating and goes through cycles of birth and death and rebirth. This Big Bang Theory has a similarity to that, except nothing that acknowledges a spiritual beingness or spiritual presence or spiritual involvement in the whole thing. So that's one problem with it, is that it's completely materialistic and mechanical. But there's a lot of questions around this Big Bang Theory, and by the way, not all scientists believe it either. There's a lot that don't, and there's a lot of different theories around what is the origin of life and the universe and life on Earth and whatnot. There's a lot of different theories, but we've kind of been saddled with this idea of the Big Bang. That's the predominant one, but it's going to undergo a change now that we've got the James Webb Space Telescope. But one of the biggest anomalies is that, based on their view of things, this expansion of the universe and things getting further apart should be slowing down. But in fact, their observations and number crunching shows that it's accelerating. That the expansion of the universe is accelerating. And where the edge of the universe is, we don't know. There's apparently, a finiteness to the universe. There's some edge. We haven't seen it, but someday it's going to reach its limit and implode. Now, I'd like to offer my theory around this. I don't have a telescope. I'm not in the queue to get to the James Webb Telescope. Apparently there's a long lineup of people that want to access it. But my domain is that of the philosophy of science. I'm really a philosopher who's interested in the philosophy of science. And so I don't have a telescope, but I can think, right? I can think about things, and I can take ideas and work with ideas, and I can read about this and that, and I spent a lot of my life studying spiritual science and sacred geometry and things like this. So my idea is that there wasn't a beginning to the universe from some central point that exploded and everything's expanding from there. My idea is that the universe is made up of multiple points, that there's centers everywhere, and in fact there was no beginning and there's no end, that the universe is infinite and eternal. So, and it also has a spiritual dimension, and what we observe with telescopes is really just the physical manifestation of something that is a spiritual beingness to begin with, a spiritual beingness and creative presence that manifests and go through cycles of birth, life, death, rebirth, and whatnot. That the universe is a consciousness. And I've got a couple of books out here tonight. I always like to put books out that are connected to the theme. The Intelligence of the Cosmos, and Why We Are Here. New Answers from the Frontiers of Science. This is well-known author Irvin Laszlo, The Intelligence of the Cosmos, another book here. The Conscious Universe. These are PhD people, and are smart people, and I align myself with the idea that the universe is consciousness, but you don't see consciousness until it manifests in some way through a physical emergence of some kind. Consciousness or spirit is kind of like the wind. You don't see the wind. You cannot see the wind. Who has seen the wind? You don't see the wind until it interfaces with something material, like leaves, the rustling of leaves in a tree. Then you hear the wind. Or wind across the surface of a lake. You don't see the wind until you see the ripples and you go, oh, when I'm at the cottage and I can see there's ripples on the lake, I realize, oh, it's windy outside. I can see it manifesting on something that's physical. So it's the same with consciousness. Like even your consciousness, people don't know what's in your mind until you do it. When you go to the donut shop, people don't know what donuts you're going to get until you order. You say it and you take it. You manifest it. And then we realize, oh, that was what's in your consciousness. You wanted the raspberry jelly donut. Same with the universe. It's a conscious spiritual presence that manifests physically, and astrophysicists are just looking at the externalization of powers and principles that are of a spiritual ideation. So my view is that the universe is infinite and eternal, and it has multiple points that are in different states of manifestation. Things being born, things existing, and then things dying. We see that with galaxies. We see that with stars, with suns. They're born, they live, they die. And this is why I call it the swampaverse. The universe is a swampaverse. Because all life begins in the swamp. Right? We see that here on Earth. As above, so below. Here on Earth, all life begins in the swamp. In the swamp, things slowly come to life, emerge. At the same time, there's a lot that's dying in a swamp. A swamp is a place of decay. Things die and go away, and then feed the things that are being born in the swamp. So we're living in a swampaverse that's infinite and eternal, that really is a manifestation of spiritual principles such as birth and death. What other principles do we see in the universe? Well, if you look at the fundamental gesture, the fundamental form of manifestation in the swampaverse, it's the spiral. The spiral is really the fundamental thing we see. Galaxies are spiraling. Solar systems are spiraling. They're spinning. They're vortexing. And we, as above, so below, we see that the Earth is a mirror of these spiritual principles of life and death and spiraling. We see it in snails, snail shells, these primitive creatures. Plants spiral towards the sun. When I reach my arm out, it spirals. There's a spiral at the top of your head, at the vortex. DNA is this spiraling, helixing gesture that's going on. So the spiral is the fundamental signature of the universe, of spirit expressing itself. And so what is a spiral? A spiral has a center and a periphery. This is why I say the universe has multiple centers. I know it sounds like an oxymoron to say multiple centers, because when you say center, you think, well, there's just one center. But I realized that's not true. When I saw the CDC is the Centers for Disease Control. Centers for Disease. Oh, how can you have centers? Shouldn't there just be one center? No, but it's the centers for disease control. So yeah, you can have multiple centers. The human has multiple centers. So we have a head center, we have a heart center, we have a metabolic center, 3 different centers of intelligence. And so this is really the universe telling us something, that it's made up of multiple centers, and they're born, they manifest a galaxy, and then the galaxy may die. But it's this vortexing, the spiraling gesture that is really key to what's going on with the heart. Because the heart, as I said, is a multifaceted, multidimensional organ. And this organ that acts as an impedance organ, stopping the flow of blood as it comes in, and then has it come into the heart. As a matter of fact, there's an amazing YouTube video I would encourage you to watch. It's not even spiritual science, it's just straight up medical science. It's called the helical heart. The helical heart. And this Spanish doctor, he demonstrates, he unravels a cow's heart, the muscle, and he shows that it's one myocardial band that rolls up into this helical shape. And he shows it with a rope. He demonstrates this rope that gets twisted into this helix, which of course, you know, is the helix, the spiral is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's in from our DNA. But the heart has this helical shape, and so it causes the blood to vortex. It's a vortexer. So there's this helixing of blood that's going on in the heart. And then when it sends it back out into the body, it's spiraling. So in a way, you could say that it's like structured water. You may have heard of structured water, where people get these machines that will structure the water, because when you structure water and you give it structure, you give it an imprint of shape, it's much healthier for the body than just chaotic water. So this structuring of the blood, the fluid of the blood, is keeping us really in tune and in sync with the cosmos out of which we're born, of which its fundamental gesture is a spiral. So this is why the heart is multidimensional. It's not only that we have a human heart, which, yeah, I get it. You look at it and it's easy to say, oh, that's just a mechanical organ that's pumping. I get why people, buy into that idea, but that idea is falling apart. And what's being exposed is that we also have a cosmic connection through our heart. We have a connection to the cosmos out of which we're born. We are born of the cosmos. We are alive because the cosmos is alive. We have consciousness because the cosmos has consciousness. And what the heart's doing is keeping us in tune with that, if we want to. Another interesting aspect of the heart is that it has striated muscles. Striated muscles are different than other muscles in the body. Striated muscles are associated with voluntary action. Why would the heart have muscles that are associated with voluntary action rather than involuntary? Because so much of what goes on in the heart is involuntary. This may be pointing to the future of our evolution, where more and more we take up in presence and take control of our heart as a multifaceted, multidimensional organ to increase our connection as offspring of the cosmos. And we'll look at this when we get to the brain as well, and consider how the brain is, people say we only use a small portion of the brain, and there's much more to be activated. Some people say, well, that part that's unactivated is also intended to increase our psychic abilities, our psychic connection, and the capacity for cosmic consciousness, and not just personal human consciousness. So, very, very interesting views on the heart. Another thing, you got to ask yourself, just, the phenomenon of the heart. Well, first of all, I'm going to read a quote from Rudolf Steiner regarding the movement of the blood. Another thing that contributes to the movement of the blood, because it's complex and there's different things. He says, the hunger for air, or oxygen, the hunger for food sets the blood in motion. It is the blood which moves in the first place, and the blood takes the heart along with it. And so it is not the heart which pumps the blood through the body, but the blood moves because of the hunger for air and hunger for food. And this moves the heart. We therefore have to say that it is the invisible human being in us which moves the heart. So he's talking about something that's invisible, an invisible part of the human that's involved in the movement of blood. It's this hunger that's in us that moves the blood. Now, he's talking about the hunger for oxygen. So the body craves oxygen. When it's craving oxygen, quite naturally it's going to send the blood to the heart and to the lungs to get reoxygenated. So there it gets the oxygen. But then it's also hungry for food, the nutrition that the blood carries, because it carries oxygen and it carries nutrition. So this hunger for nutrition in the body then draws the blood back out of the heart and to the body. So this invisible force that is at work. It's on another dimension that is involved in the movement of the blood. One other little quote here, where he says, we thus have to say that with regard to the influences on the heart, we certainly have a relationship to the movements of cosmic bodies, especially the moon. So I add that because, it's not only things peripherally in the body at the cellular level, the hunger that's there and the pumping action that takes place there, but he's saying there's also a connection with the blood to cosmic forces, and he refers to the moon in particular. We know with a tree, the sun would draw the sap up, but he's saying in the body it's in particular the moon, and that makes perfect sense because we know how the moon affects the tides, how it affects bodies of water on the planet. Now why wouldn't the moon also affect the movement of fluids in our body? We're made up of 75% fluid, so we're also going to be subject to moon forces as well. So when we talk about peripheral action on the movement of the blood in the heart, it's not just what's happening at the periphery of your body at the tissue level, it's at the periphery outside in terms of our connection to celestial bodies. That may seem like a stretch for some of you, but we know that the celestial bodies do have an influence. Solar flares, phases of the moon. One last thing I'll mention with regards to this vortexing is that I've worked on biodynamic farms. This is a form of agriculture that was inspired and developed by Rudolf Steiner, working with farmers when he was alive. And one of the practices or the preparations that he guided them to do was to take a bucket of water and crushed quartz crystal, and you put that into the bucket of water and you stir it in one direction so you get the water vortexing, and then you stop and you let it go back to chaos, so you just keep your stick in there and that stops the vortexing, and then you go the reverse direction and you stir it so you get a vortex going counterclockwise. You stop, it goes into chaos, then you stir it again clockwise, get it going, you stop, and you go back and forth this way with the spiraling of the water for an hour. And I've done it, and it's quite a pleasant task. You sit there for water, just stirring for an hour, stirring this water with the crushed crystal in it. And then what do you do with that? You take it and you then put it on your field, or you put it on your compost heap, which then goes on your field. You want to, in a sense, inoculate your compost and your soil with this water that has been imprinted, and of course the crystals in the water will help with the imprinting of water. We know water can be imprinted, and the crystals will help because crystals are kind of antenna-like. And then you put this out on the field, and because the crystals are kind of antenna-like and the water has been spiralized, it's going to connect the cosmological forces. And this is what we need in our farming practices, in our growing practices, and this is really at the heart of biodynamic farming, is to make your food more biologically dynamic. It needs to be connected to the cosmological forces, and not just the moon and the sun, but other planets in our solar system as well. They all have an influence on the earth here. The earth is a mirror of the qualities of these different celestial bodies. And so this preparation with the water, the quartz, and the spiralizing, it's just an interesting note to see. Well, we're doing that with our heart. With every heartbeat, you're vortexing and keeping yourself in tune, potentially, with the harmony of the cosmos. Any comments anybody wants to make at this point? Any questions? We can have discussion later on if we want. How are we doing for time?
8:11.
All right, good. We're doing fine.
Very good.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
How does this affect, let's say, I know there's physicians that work with Rudolf Steiner's information. How would this affect, this information affect how they diagnose and work with different issues? Or does it?
Well, for sure, yes. I mean, there are, yes, as you said, medical doctors that are trained, in the conventional medical practices, but augment that with the indications given by Rudolf Steiner, who worked with doctors when he was alive. And one of those doctors is still alive. He's written this book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart.
Mm-hmm.
This is Dr. Cowan, MD, Thomas Cowan. And he's got stuff on YouTube and whatnot. He's written a book on this. He's written a book on water. He's written a book on cancer. And there's information in there. I can't really relay anything specific. The anthroposophically extended medicine works with their own preparations, their own tinctures and things that some of them have homeopathic quantities of minerals like quartz or gold or silver, things like that get injected into the body, which then help us attune to those qualities in the planet and beyond the planet. I mean, I guess one example. I know sometimes Waldorf teachers get a little burnt out by the end of the winter, and they'll go get a shot of gold. You can get gold. It's a homeopathic preparation of gold, so there's no actual physical gold. It's not like they're melting down your wedding band and sticking it in your vein. It's a homeopathic preparation, so the liquid has been imprinted with the quality of gold. That's the way the homeopathic remedies work. And so gold is said to attune us to the sun forces. So by March, you're kind of needing a reconnection to the sun forces. So you get a shot of gold, and you get some of that sun forces back into your body, into the blood. And then that circulates through and feeds the cells, and away you go. Yeah, let's move on to the question about do we think with our brain?
Sure. Oh, it just is something in response to the last little thing you said about the body and the being different. A number of cultures do differentiate, like a soul or chi of the body, soul, a soul energy, and all that as different aspects or different areas of our being. And
that's exactly right. There's so many cultures, the older cultures, the Eastern,
Hawaiian,
the Hawaiian, the Eastern cultures,
Egyptian,
all
believed
in a multi-dimensional nature to the human being.
Different consciousness.
Yeah, and the pendulum has swung, in terms of our consciousness, really into going into the material world, to go down deeper and deeper into the finite details. That's why Western science, it wants to dissect everything and cut it up into pieces and name it and catalog it and compare it. And that's fine and well. That's an appendage that we've developed, and a capacity for this objectification of the material world. But we need to learn to look at the material world so it teaches us, and we don't just impose on it what we think of it. That becomes a little dangerous, where we're imposing our ideas, and we want to control it, and we have questionable motives and morality. This is all coming onto the table now as we become more and more powerful in our genetic work and our AI work and so forth. We really need to bring things back into a balance where we realize that we are an offspring of higher consciousness, and that this higher consciousness has been developing us over a long period of time to become a carriage into which it can inhabit. We're an offspring. There's been an evolution of a carriage into which this consciousness can descend. So, maybe we should talk about the evolution piece next. The question: do humans come from animals? Have humans just, has humanality grown out of animality? Period. That seems to be the evidence when you look at things with your physical eyes, and you look for physical evidence. We can see a sequence of development in the evolution of species in the fossil record on this planet, and it indicates somehow, science doesn't really know how, things have gone from a simpler form into compounding complexity. And so we arrive at this, science is at this point where it says that's what it looks like, but we don't know how. We don't know how something animate, animated, alive, arose out of something that's inanimate, that's not alive. The whole Kant-Laplace nebulae theory is that it was just gas and dust that gathered together, created this rock, created our solar system, and somehow life emerged out of lifelessness. And that there has been this evolution of species. It's quite incredible. But is it the whole picture? Do we want to just trust what our eyes, what our senses see? And do we want to put our faith in the scientific narrative that says, yep, humans came from animals? It does become something of a faith-based science. And we have to admit that we put our faith in astrophysicists and in biological scientists who present us with evidence and their best theories, and we go, yeah, it's the best theory, so let's teach our kids that you came from animals. And we see that even in the embryological development. We see this incredible thing from the union of a single sperm and egg, one cell in the uterus develops into a human being. Whoa! Now, of course, that development takes place within a human being. Life produced life. And that's an important principle. Life produces life. Something that's dead cannot produce something living. So what spiritual science and the work of Rudolf Steiner states is that, yes, something living produced life. And we're not talking about something living biologically, but spiritual life. And we have to make this distinction that it's not just biological life that is life. That's the way science thinks. Something that's alive is biological. A rock is not biological, so it's not alive. A plant is, an animal is, a human is. That's biological life. But within spiritual science, there is an acknowledgement that there is spiritual life. And that when you die, even though your biological body dies, there is a spiritual life that continues. And that spiritual life that continues came out of spiritual life. Life begat life. Something invisible was at work. Something beyond what the senses can perceive, but perhaps the heart can perceive. This is another question around the function of the heart, that it's an organ of perception. And I don't have time to go into all of that, but you can look at the research done by the Heart Math Institute that looks at the heart as an organ of perception, that it's an organ of intelligence, that in fact the body has 3 centers of intelligence. Obviously the head, we think of the brain as the center of intelligence, but more and more recognizing that the heart, even with its neurological cells in it, is also an organ of intelligence and perception. And also people are talking about gut intelligence. This 3rd center is like a 3rd brain. And these 3 centers, this threefoldness, it's seen physically as a brain, a nerve system, and a heart and lung system with its the arteries and capillaries that go everywhere, and then this metabolic reproductive limb system, which is centered down here but also has aspects interwoven within the whole being. That this threefoldness is working together to be a carriage for a non-physical intelligence, not a brain, heart, and organs, but the capacity to think and to feel and to will. That on another dimension we can think, we can feel with our heart, and we can will. I mean, ask yourself, when your heart gets excited and emotional, is that a physical thing? That's on another level. That's emotional. And yet it does affect the flow of blood. This is another point to observe. When you have an emotion which is non-physical, it affects the physical body and it gets your blood running. So these dimensions are interwoven. This is why the heart is a multidimensional being. And that the whole human with this threefoldness is meant to be a mirror and a carriage for the consciousness of the universe, the spiritual beingness of the universe. So think of the implications of what I'm saying here. That if we as human beings can think and feel and have a will, intentions, will, to get something done, to move something, that's implying that the consciousness, the presence of the universe, also has thoughts and feelings and a will. I should just stop right there and think about, oh my gosh, we're living in a place in space where we're surrounded by this consciousness. We're born of this consciousness that has thinking, feeling, and will. And feeling must have love. I mean, if we've got love, then where'd that love come from? There must be love in the universe. There is love in the universe. And we are manifesting it. Because we are emanations of the consciousness of the universe come into manifestation. And we can love each other because that is inherent within the spiritual beingness of the entire universe. And we are just one center. We are a center in the universe. Every one of us is an equal center in the multi-centered universe. There's no edges to the universe. It's not going to end. It's just made up of centers that come and go, come and grow, expand and contract. And the heart is at the center of centers. This is how important the heart is and why Rudolf Steiner put such high emphasis on getting the right picture of your heart. It is the center of centers. And it's really mirroring this expansive, contractive nature of the universe. The universe isn't expanding and then going to contract one day. The principles of expansion and contraction are inherent in the universe. They're there simultaneously. The quality of expansion and contraction is inherent simultaneously in the universe, but it's mirrored in us in a sequential linear time where we have expansion of the heart, contraction of the heart, expansion of the heart, contraction of the heart. We're mirroring what is there simultaneously in the universe. So it's not expanding. Matter of fact, it just looks like it's expanding from a certain perspective. If you were somewhere else in the universe, those planets that seem to be moving away would be coming towards you. And you'd go, oh, it looks like it's contracting because they're coming towards me. This is because I think I just got to stop there because this is getting kind of complex. But what I'm hoping to do is to stimulate your own thinking about this so that you're not necessarily putting your faith in scientific narrative that keeps changing. It keeps changing over the centuries. It keeps changing over the years. It's going to change again with the James Webb Space Telescope. Not all scientists believe in this, and I'm trying to present the most accurate picture, the most all-inclusive picture of what's going on in the universe that includes the spiritual things that our ancestors of the ancient times believed in, as well as what scientists are producing through modern research. So we were talking about, do humans come from animals? And Rudolf Steiner makes another rather enigmatic statement when he says, no, it's the other way around, that animals come from humans. Take a moment to think of that animals come from humans. How can that be? Is he crazy? Is he just like flying in the face of scientific evidence? Well, the evidence is true that the human has taken on form that's similar to animals. That we've inherited an evolving form from animals, and in fact over 95% of our DNA we have in common. I think it's even higher than that. We have in common with chimps and apes. Over 95%. So there's certainly something that's shared there in terms of the body, the human body, with the animal kingdom. And it's also interesting to know that we share 60% of the DNA with bananas. 60% with bananas, 95% with monkeys. What does that mean? So this is true that we've inherited a form from evolving species, but where did animals get their form? Where did that all come from? Nobody's answered that question. We say humans come from animals, but where did animals come from? There's no answer to that science can offer. So it's back to Rudolf Steiner's point that animals come from humans, because the whole idea is that the consciousness, the invisible spiritual presence of the universe, has been manifesting, has been rolling out into form to ultimately create a carriage for itself. And we are the intended carriage for consciousness. And as I said, this carriage is threefold: that we can think, we can feel, and we can have a will, we can have intentions. By the way, I'll just, as a quick aside here, it's interesting to note that in the will area, at the base of the spine, in the subtle bodies, according to the ancient wisdom, is Kundalini, which is a coiled or spiraled energy, sometimes thought of as a snake or a serpent that is coiled 3.5 times. But when Kundalini is awakened, aroused, and uncoiled, that becomes willpower within the chakra system to awaken these centers of the chakra system and ultimately awaken the brain chakras to give you cosmic consciousness. So the will, and the will center, this subtle energy coiled, is again a mirror of the cosmos, whose fundamental gesture is spiraling, expanding, contracting, a center with a periphery, a tension of opposites between things that are moving out from a center and things that are being held and coming back into a center. So yeah, this threefoldness is intended to be the carriage for the cosmic consciousness. And the animals came from the human in the sense that over the course of evolution, different prototypes were being developed along the way to find the most perfect carriage, physical carriage. And so the animal kingdom are those prototypes. They're earlier versions of the development of a carriage for the ultimate arousal of the human. And Rudolf Steiner gives the analogy of Michelangelo sculpting the statue of David. You may have seen, I think I actually saw the statue of David when I was in Italy. This huge, magnificent stone carving by Michelangelo, which initially was just this raw piece of rock, but he chipped away at it, and out emerged this incredible form of David, the king of the Israelites. This beautiful human form emerged out of the rock, and all the chipped pieces off, Steiner says, is analogous to the animal kingdom. Those were the parts of the evolving human that were not balanced, that were not, in that perfect balance of things, which, perfect balance is a balance of the head, the heart, and the will centers. So interestingly enough, you can see in the animal world, they're all specialized in a certain direction. The human's very generalized in this threefoldness, but some animals are more head-like, some animals are more will-like, and some animals are more in the trunk. So, for example, birds are more head-like, and he even says that the rodents are like that, whereas your ungulates, your bovines, your cows are more in the direction of the will. A cow has 4 stomachs. Like, there's a lot of metabolic activity going on. There's a lot of reproductive activity going on. There's a lot of will strength that's there. And then in the middle, that represent more of this trunk area, you have the canines and the felines. And an even clearer way to see this is when you examine the dentition of different animals, because there's 3 kinds of teeth. There's the incisors at the front. You've got, which are for, nibbling at and, biting things. And then at the back you have the molars, which are more for grinding. And then in the middle, you've got the canines. So rodents, they have these long teeth in the front, for getting seeds and things like that. And same with birds, they have this beak that they can use to open up seeds and get the center out. Cows, as I said, which are more in the will direction of things, they're out of balance that way, you could say. They have molars. They just grind and chew all day long with their molars. And then cats and dogs, primarily, the canines, with canines and felines. But the human, being a generalist and being a balance of all this threefoldness, we've got all 3 represented in a balanced way in our dentition, with molars in the back, the incisors in the front, and the canines. This all comes out of Steiner's work, what I'm sharing here. So, yeah, it's both, really, when you look at it, that the human body evolved out of this evolution of species and the growing of the animals as an ascent out of the material world. But the material world just couldn't do that on its own. It needed spiritual life, and that is a descent of spiritual life down into matter, with the idea and the intention and the will of the human becoming a carriage for higher consciousness, which is why we can say that animals came out of the human. Is that as clear as day for everybody?
I just personally want to take the moment to thank you, Jesse, for putting all this together in such an incredible three-folded presentation. I can see, like, right here is a lifetime and body of work.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the appreciation there. And it really really has been a lifetime passion to understand things, not just from a scientific perspective, which never felt right to me, because at an early age I had a spiritual awakening at age 20, and ever since then it's been like a burr in my saddle that would not let me settle with the conventional mainstream perspective of things, but that I had to go further, I had to go beyond that and really put together, at least in my own mind, a picture that's inclusive of something of the spiritual reality with the physical reality that we can observe. Yeah, the last thing I'll look at is I haven't really covered this idea about, do we think with our brain? Do you think with your brain? And of course there's a lot of research in science these days into neurology and brain function and so forth, you know, and the idea is that the brain is the mind, and this has been a quest for quite some time. Even Descartes, you know, was trying to find out, where is the mind? Is it in the heart? Is it in the pineal gland? Is it in your big toe? Where is the mind? Is the mind the brain? And if you think about it, you know, when someone says they know something, which by the way is what the word science means. Science means to know. And we're all scientists. We're all trying to know in our own way. We're all sciencing. But when a person says that they really know something, they often say, I know in my heart this to be true. They don't say, I know in my brain this to be true. They say, I know in my heart that it resonates with this vibrating, oscillating organ of perception, multifaceted, multi-dimensional part, that we know, and we even think with our heart. We have heart intelligence, emotional intelligence, if you will. So what is the brain doing? And does it think? Let's just do a little test here. I want you to raise your finger. Just raise your finger up. Okay. Who did that? Who raised it up? Who raised the finger?
Me.
Me. Right.
Yeah.
I did. The I. And the word I in Latin is ego. Ego is the Latin word for I. So when we say I, we're referring to this ego, which is the thing that's self-aware. Take that finger and now say I and point with it. I, point. You're pointing at a chair. You don't point at a chair and go I. Where do you point when you say I? That's it, you point at yourself. And that's one of the functions of the ego, is this self-awareness. I am. I think, therefore I am. I, as an ego, think, therefore I am. So it's the ego, it's this spiritual entity, this invisible entity that does the thinking and does the identifying. And if you're identifying your I-ness just with your physical body, you're really not observing that there's something of an invisible part that's active when you think and you say I and you make choices. This is really something we need to come to terms with, that there's a difference between the human body and the human being. Now, in terms of brain research, there was a fellow, a Canadian, well, he was born in the States, but then he moved to Montreal, Wilder Penfield, a medical doctor, a neurosurgeon, and he helped develop the Montreal Neurological Institute back in the 1940s and 50s. And he did some very interesting brain research where he was able to open up the scalp and the skull of patients while they were awake and conscious. He would have them under local anesthetic so they wouldn't feel that they were having their head cut open and their brain exposed, and probing into the temporal lobe of the brain. And when he did this and the people were awake, for one thing, he could move body parts by probing the temporal lobe. So body parts would move. So, we see how that is a function of the brain, to move body parts. He also found that it evoked memories. The people would have memories when he probed around different parts of the temporal lobe. So that was a significant discovery, that memories are stored in the brain, or at least we think they are. But we'll get to this in a moment. Our memories stored in the brain. But we were seeing how the memories were brain based, and when he probed the brain, people had memories. They'd be awake and they'd go, "Oh, I'm having a memory of something. What are you doing up there?" So, "Oh, I'm just poking around in your temporal lobe." What do you think I'm doing? But he found that, and at the beginning of his career, he believed that the brain and the mind were one. But the more he did this with, different patients, he realized there was this part of them that was awake and observing that was going on, that was detached from the memories or the movement of body parts. And through that, he really came to the point of distinguishing that there is something separate between the brain and the mind, or the brain and the soul. At the end of his career and his life, he believed that the human did have a soul, or some invisible part that inhabits the body. He also observed how this probing of the brain, there was no choices. Didn't elicit the choice-making mechanisms that humans make. And of course, we know the brain is a lot about choices. We see the neurological pathways; those are all really choices. Do I go this neurological pathway? Do I go that neurological pathway? There's a lot of choices at the brain level. But making choices is another function of the ego. Along with identity and awareness is the capacity to make choices, moral choices. That making moral choices is not a function of the brain. That it's a function of another level, another dimension of your being. So this is why he really began to distinguish between what the brain does and what the spiritual entity of the human being does. So back to this question, are memories stored in the brain? He was able to probe there and evoke memories. But another interesting thing around heart surgery, something that's been observed time and time again with not heart surgery, but rather heart transplants, because we do that fairly frequently now. I've been doing it for a few decades, transplanting a heart from someone who was in an accident or something and putting it into a heart transplant recipient. That is very well documented that the recipient of a heart transplant starts to have new desires and impulses and urges that were not their own, but were of the person who had the heart originally. Things like they'll start craving beer or peanuts, or want to listen to jazz music, You can look this up. That memories and desires and urges somehow get carried with the heart. But is it the physical organ of the heart, just like is it the physical organ of the brain that stores these things, or might it be another level of our being? And this is really the viewpoint of the ancient civilizations, who also had their own forms of science. Don't think we're the ones that started science. The Egyptians had science, the Persians had science, the Indians, the Chinese, they all had their own form of science, but they were really more towards a spiritual science because they acknowledged a spiritual dimension and a spiritual part of the human being. That they would say that we have other bodies than the physical bodies. And in the Indian tradition, they call them koshas, or sheaths. That the physical body has these other koshas or sheaths. They're subtle bodies, they're energetic bodies. They're made of chi or prana or ka, whatever you want to call it. They all have different names for them, but it boils down to the same thing. That they're a subtle nature, they're not physical, and they can't be observed in a physical way. They can't be observed with the physical eyes. They can't be put into a test tube and things like that. But they're there. They exist. And memories and impulses and urges exist on that level of our being, but then come through the physical organs such as the brain and the heart. And Rudolf Steiner made the analogy with the brain. He said it was like a bucket. That the brain was like a bucket that could go and fetch information. It could go and fetch sense impressions, right? That the brain, through the eyes and ears, can go out into the world and, oh, I hear my water fountain over there. I go out through my ears and I bring that information back into my brain. So the brain is able to go out and get information. The brain can also go in. The brain can go in and go, oh, yeah, blood sugar levels getting low, or we need to up the adrenaline, or things like this. The brain is like a bucket that goes and gets information outwardly or inwardly through sensory perception. I used to tease my niece, who, she learned at school that the brain is what we think with, and I used to say the brain is just an ATM. The brain is like an ATM. You go to the ATM and you put in your card and you want to, access some money. So what does the ATM do? Well, the ATM doesn't have the information in the ATM. The ATM has to go off to a bigger brain, or, into the consciousness of the bank to find out if you got 20 bucks that you can take out of the ATM. So the ATM is a local interface, just like the brain is a local interface that can access beyond itself to get more information. So the brain is great, but we have higher aspects that need to be recognized and utilized, especially if we're going to develop the capacity for consciousness, which is really what's waiting in the wings. The planet, is I think a little tired and fed up with humans bumbling around and really ignoring the real needs, the real connections that are available here to serve the planet and serve the evolution of things. And we need to cultivate the capacities of consciousness by recognizing that we have not only physical organs, but we have spiritual organs as well. And when we develop that, it's sort of like with Graham Hancock. He says that there was a quantum leap in terms of consciousness when humans, Neanderthals, discovered mushrooms and psychoactive substances. They were looking for food, and all of a sudden somebody scooped up some magic mushrooms, and it's like, woo, I am awake. What is going on? But it wasn't just awake to the senses, but awake to higher dimensions. You know that if you've taken significant amounts of psychoactive substances, that It electrifies parts of the brain, the pineal gland, which, by the way, why do they call it a pineal gland? Because it's shaped like a pine cone. Pineal. And what's a pine cone shaped like? A spiral. I've got this book, The Vortex of Life. It's got a pine cone on the front. And this is where the pineal gland gets its name. And that little gland, it's not that big, but it's considered to be part of the endocrine system that interfaces with higher koshas, higher sheaths. That is a higher organ for higher consciousness. So, yeah, acknowledging these things is an important step in activating them and utilizing them. And then, as I wind this down, I just want to say that in terms of an ego being having a human experience in a human body, in a physical body, on a physical plane of existence, this is what consciousness wants to do. It wants to roll out into manifestation so it can evolve itself, so consciousness can evolve itself. It needs to be in a materialized sense. As we wake up to that fact, we can, as an ego being, start to identify ourselves. We can start to shape our identity, because that's one of our functions is as an ego, is how we identify. We can identify ourselves as a microcosm of the macrocosm. That we really contain everything. That the human is a magnificent, sculpted being that is a composite of everything. The mineral world, we're made up of minerals. We have the plant kingdom within us. We embody all that the animals have given us. And now we have this ego that is an I am, that can identify with the I amness of the cosmos. Which is why I wore this t-shirt tonight. Special t-shirt I had made that says, I am that. I am that. And that is actually ancient wisdom. That comes from Tat Devam Asi, which is Sanskrit words from the ancient Vedic traditions, where even back then they recognized that the human is a microcosm of the macrocosm, that we embrace the allness in ourselves. And so we can identify, I am that, with everything we see. We are that big. And when we do that, we can allow the cosmic consciousness to live through us. And even more importantly, because the center of centers is the heart, we can let the cosmic consciousness love through us. That there is love in the universe, and we can let that love through us.